Welcome, board members and guests, to the Wednesday, May 24, 2023 meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, and the Placer County Local Transportation Authority. At public comment. After I open an item for public comment, those joining us by Zoom webinar can signal they wish to speak by clicking the Raise Hand button on the middle bottom of the Zoom webinar window. If you are joining over the phone, you can press *9 and PCTPA staff will call out individuals one by one who have indicated they wish to speak. If you experience technical difficulties and are unable to provide public comment during this meeting, please email your comment to solvisable at ssabol@pctpa.net. Thank you for joining us today, and Councilwoman Cortez, would you be so kind as to lead us in the pledge to the flag?
Ready and salute. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item B, roll call.
Broadway.
Here.
Burris.
Here.
Cortez. Holmes.
Here.
Howdeshelt.
Here.
Joyner. Jones.
I here.
We got a call.
Aye. Yes, I know. Okay. Moving on to agenda item C, agenda review. Matt?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. As far as agenda review, we do have an update. Following the original publication of the May 24th PCTPA board agenda package, staff was made aware of a minor descriptive change to one of the projects identified as your item G in the packet, PCTP consent calendar item 9, low carbon transit operations program. The zero emissions bus replacement project administered by the city of Roseville is to support the replacement of 7 diesel buses with new battery electric buses, which will help the Roseville Transit implement its zero emission fleet conversion plan in response to state regulations. There is no change to the original allocation, but there is a pink handout in your packet to reflect the revised consent calendar and item.
Okay. So then, do we have to approve the agenda? No?
Not yet.
Okay. So we'll go on to D, item D, AB 2449.
Yes, Madam Chair. All boards are present, all board members are present or participating remotely with public access, so there is no board action that is necessary. We can move to the next agenda item, item E.
Okay, item E, approval of action minutes from March 22nd, 2023.
Second.
Okay, all those, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, do you need a roll call, I believe?
Yes, I will.
Yes, you do, okay.
Okay. Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Cortez.
Yes.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Holmes.
Yes.
Howdeshelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay. Item D, public comment. Persons may address the board on items not on this agenda. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Do we have somebody? Hello. Good morning.
Tomorrow. First, I want to thank you for the copy of the agenda packet. I couldn't manage to get online to get it, so the 15 pages I appreciate having. I thought I'd talk about a little anecdote this morning, and it was a project called Westway in Manhattan. It was a freeway to be submerged along the waterfront underground with a David Rockefeller development of housing all on top of it. And I was the first person to show a map of that in Congress, and they'd heard about it for years. But anyway, what stopped it was a hearing I went to, not a hearing I was involved in the lawsuit, but the courageous Judge Grisey found that the State Department of Transportation had failed to release a study about the striped bass fishery, which was dependent on the whole striped bass fishery in the Hudson River was dependent on the inner pier area, and it was planned to be fill-in, and the state had never released that report as part of the environmental documents. I didn't hear about it until I think I read about his retirement or perhaps his recent passing away, but he went on to hold a hearing, a corruption hearing on that issue. I just wanted to mention that there are, freeway struggles all over the country, including one my dad was originally involved in when they proposed the Panhandle Freeway in San Francisco, and that one was finally defeated by a vote of the Board of Supervisors. So just a little perspective this morning, I thought, coming up here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Anyone else? Is there anyone on Zoom? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to item G, the consent calendar. These items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested citizen may request an item be removed from the consent calendar for discussion. Would anybody like to remove anything from the consent?
I have none.
No?
Joiner moves approval.
Anyone online?
Dowden Calvio, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Take it away, Solvi.
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Cortez.
Yes.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Holmes.
Yes.
Haudashelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, moving on then to item H, consent calendar, Airport Land Use Commission. Again, these items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They'll be acted on by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested citizen may request an item be removed from the consent calendar for discussion. Would anyone like anything removed off of?
I have none.
Hey, no one on? Okay, hearing none.
Joiner moves approval.
Second.
Okay, motion and second. We're keeping you busy this morning.
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Cortez.
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Holmes.
Yes.
Haudashelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, moving on to item I, 9 a.m. public hearing, Beautiful Minds Wellness General Plan and Community Plan Amendments and Rezone Consistency Determination. David Melko, will you be,
I will be handling this item here.
Okay.
We have a brief PowerPoint to summarize the staff presentation. So we're asking you to conduct a public hearing today regarding the consistency of the Beautiful Minds project in relation to the Placer County Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. And we're recommending that you find the Beautiful Minds Wellness Project, your general plan amendments, community plan amendments, and rezone are consistent, subject to the conditions recommended in the staff report. So with that, I'm going to walk through. So the role of the Airport Land Use Commission, this is probably more for the audience, but the role of the commission is twofold. It's to adopt and maintain an airport land use compatibility plan, and in that regard, tongue-tied, review plans and zoning regulations within the airport influence area around airports, and that usually extends to about a 2-mile area around the airports. Today, you have 3 potential consistency determinations to make. One is to find the project consistent with the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. Number 2, consistent subject to conditions, which is the staff recommendation. And 3, inconsistent based upon specific conflicts, which you would need to make findings. So what is the Beautiful Minds Wellness Project? Okay, so the Placer County is requesting the Airport Land Use Commission to determine the Beautiful Minds Wellness Project. The general plan amendment, the community plan amendment, rezone are consistent with the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. And as a reminder, under state law, these are considered mandatory reviews. And so they will come to this commission regardless of when the general plans for the various jurisdictions are determined to be consistent. So the proposed amendments today in the rezone will change the land use from industrial park to a business park, and this will allow medical services with extended care in that business park land use. There are also additional entitlements, a minor use permit, a tentative parcel map, land division, which divides the parcel into 3 lots, design and CEQA review. So the Beautiful Minds Wellness Project is located on New Airport Road. It proposes to subdivide a 12.3 acre project. I believe the Beautiful Minds Wellness people purchased the property from Ceronics, which is an adjacent industrial campus. And they will be dividing the parcel into 3 lots for development of 11 buildings totaling somewhere around shy of 107,000 square feet. I will note that back in 2004, Saronics had a master plan for this 12.3 acre property that I think totaled slightly less than 90,000 square feet. So Lot 1, and there'll be a map following this slide, will include medical practice offices and a fitness center. Lot 2, which is closest to the airport, will include mini storage buildings, a caretaker/office residence. It was described as both, and that may be resolved later in the Placer County planning process. And boat, RVs, solar-covered parking. And Lot 3 will include general commercial, retail, and what's considered short-term stay, less than 30 days for lodging for outpatient treatment. So this is the map here, and so Lot 1, medical office, and proposed Lot 3, general commercial, with the short-term stay is along Old Airport Road. The map shows self-storage as Lot 3, that should be shown as Lot 2. So, what is Beautiful Minds? They do have a website. They are a medical office practice, and they offer a range of services from senior peer counseling to various therapies, psychiatry, exercise, holistic education, life health coaching, as well as outpatient medical services. And more can be found at their website. So, in terms of the staff review for the consistency determination, so the Beautiful Minds Wellness Project is located in the Auburn Municipal Airport Compatibility Zone C1, and once again, a map will follow this slide. Project site is about 1,100 feet from the airport runway. I will note in the staff report, it indicates that the project boundary to the airport is 500 feet. So when I did the Google Maps, and the measurement, I took it from a point to a different point, and subsequently, in talking with the city's airport manager, he corrected me that it should be 1,100 feet. So that's a minor correction to the staff report. Zone C1 covers extended airport approach and departure corridor. It is affected by a moderate degree of noise and risk, safety issues. This particular area is within and outside the 55 CNEL noise contour. So when we identify compatibility zones and the criteria when we do these review, we focus on 4 factors, and that's partly the role of the Airport Land Use Commission. So we look at noise, we look at safety, we look at airspace protection and overflight provisions. You are making a consistency determination. You're not judging the land use. That is the purview of the Placer County Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors to do that. So that's primarily for the audience, because we will get comments sometimes on land use matters that are not germane to the Airport Land Use Commission. So this is the map for Auburn Municipal Airport. This is their compatibility plan, and it shows where the Beautiful Minds Wellness Project is. And I apologize, I use red, but there's also red shown on the map, and those are for height overlay zones. So our staff review. So the applicant conducted a noise study for the project, both for airport noise and transportation noise. And the applicant's consultant recommends that in terms of the short-term lodging and the caretaker residence, that the windows be upgraded in order for the interior noise levels to meet ALUCP criteria. So we support that recommendation. In terms of safety, the compatibility plan requires that the intensity be 100 people per acre, and this particular project comes well below that. It's at, I think, around 12 to 13 people per acre. It also needs to meet the 20% open space, open land criteria in order for a plane, in case of an emergency landing, needs to occur, and it definitely provides that. Airspace, the structures, including construction cranes, cannot exceed 70 feet in height. The buildings here will be about 2-story buildings, which gets up to about 25 feet. If you have a crane mounted on a truck with a boom, it gets to about 40 feet. So we are well within the 70 feet. If for some reason something changes subsequently down the line and anything exceeds 70 feet, then an FAA airspace review is required for that particular project. And in that regard, it would need to come back to the commission, because the commission would need to relook at its determination in light of the FAA review. But nothing at this point indicates anything close to 70 feet. There are, under airspace, other flight hazards that we need to take into account. So the boat, RV, solar covered parking. So there's always the potential for glare from solar panels to airport pilots. And so there was nothing in there really to describe the solar panels. But today, I looked on the market and FAA website, and most of the solar panels sold here in the United States, probably like 98%, include an anti-reflective surface coating. But since we don't know exactly what the panels are going to be, we make the recommendation that it includes an anti-reflective surface coating. Likewise, because it's a campus environment with office and medical, there will be exterior lighting in the parking as well as on the buildings. And so the recommendation is that the lighting be pointed downward and concealed as much as possible, because once again, the lighting and the glare can be confusing to pilots as they approach and depart the airport. There are no overflight issues, because overflight is an issue for residential development, and it requires proximity notice as part of when you purchase a home, and all of the paperwork that you go through. There's something there to sign that says you are near an airport. So we're recommending today that you find the Beautiful Minds Wellness General Plan, Community Plan, and Rezone consistent with the LUCP, subject to noise, safety, airspace, and the other potential flight hazard recommendations that I previously summarized. And we're recommending that you then authorize the executive director to sign and submit a consistency determination letter to Placer County. And with that, I recommend that you conduct a public hearing and then make a consistency determination. I'd be glad to answer any questions. I do believe that the applicant is here today with their consulting engineer in case if there's any questions of the project, and they may wish to speak. Angel Green from Placer County, who is the planner shepherding this through the Placer County planning process, is here in case if there are any entitlement questions or the next steps with respect to the Placer County planning process. And the airport, city's manager for the airport is also in the audience today, just in case if there are any technical questions about operations at the airport.
Okay, do board members have questions?
I do, Madam Chair. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to do the wrong button for the mic, so thank you very much for setting me straight. It's been a morning already. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the information, and I had an opportunity to review through this. I just want to confirm on the noise issue. We hear so many complaints from folks that live around the airport with regards to noise. And this is a facility where they're going to provide wellness services. It sounds like there's short-term stay. I'm not sure what kind of services they're garnering when they're in that short-term stay, but I'm assuming it's something that requires peace and quiet and serenity and so forth. And so I know we're recommending those extra windows, but I just wanted to maybe dive into that noise issue any further. I mean, if they're outside, they're not going to have any noise protection, of course. I'm very sensitive about the airport, and I know that there are so many residents, they contact the city on a regular basis about the noise. And having a facility for medical and wellness services, I just want to make sure we're not going to get complaints about noise and compatibility. So.
That's a valid concern. And in hindsight, I wish I included the noise map. But this particular project, the northern boundary, if I could just go back a little bit here. Let's go here. The northern, so this project falls within the 55 CNEL noise contour. And so the northern, what it's shown, lot 3 here, the self-storage. that area falls within the 55 CNEL boundary. And so that particular area, there's some noise. So that particular use is appropriate for that particular.
No one's gonna be living there.
Right.
So, that use didn't really concern, it was more of the
Right.
short-term housing and the facility itself where
Right.
the services would be provided and whether or not, their clients are going to, have
Right.
concerns.
So south of that road there that shows, the self-storage and where the lot boundaries are, that is, south of that is outside the 55 CNEL contour. And in theory, people that reside or are outside the 55 CNEL noise contour are not supposed to be affected by noise. I mean, that's theory, and that's what the literature says. So, in terms of outdoor activities, I can go by what the FAA and Caltrans Division of Aeronautics says will occur outside of that contour, and it doesn't appear to be an issue associated with this type of use. The interior noise level, we've made the recommendation with the window upgrades, so that would deal with any particular issues inside. I'm not sure much further what we could do other than under the overflight provisions, which we have no conditions for. If it was a residential project, we would recommend that there be a proximity notice identified, so that residents know there is an airport, there will be noise, there could be safety issues. I suppose, we could, recommend to the applicant that they post, or as part of the literature, that is distributed to patients, that there is an airport, and if you go outside, there will be noise.
I actually like that idea. Again, the more, the better in this instance, just with regards to notice and things of that nature. Just, it clearly is at the airport, but I'm just very sensitive. And I appreciate the science behind it. And I just needed that reassurance. But I also like asking the applicant to include in their literature that this is on, near an airport, and that they're, just so that people know what they're getting into, because that's all I need are more complaints from customers and so forth, that noise is bothering them, so.
If the commission
I'm
is.
sorry, Madam Chair, can we hear from the applicant on,
Sure, yeah.
I mean, clearly they knew there was an airport there.
And it's not the applicant I'm concerned about,
Well,
it's, I don't know what kind of, if people are staying there in short term, I don't know if they're gonna contact the city.
Well,
And I'm not suggesting that to hold
yeah.
this up, I just wanted to get extra assurance, because I know that
I
I will
don't
get.
think you'll ever get
extra-
100% assurance on anything, ever. And I want to
I
make sure
get that.
we're within our authority. And I'd like to hear from the applicant.
Okay.
Good morning, Jason Brown, Chief Operating Officer at Beautiful Minds Wellness. Thank you for the question and the concern. We currently have an existing service there on the campus. The service that we're going to be providing is the intensive outpatient program. It's a half day during the week, 5 days a week. We do have walking paths already out there on the trail. There hasn't been any complaints to date, about the noise. You have the overhead airplanes, but it's similar to if you're on the golf course, you hear that as well. It is a concern, though, when it comes to the short-term lodging. The idea behind that is for individuals who want to participate in the intensive outpatient program that don't live close to proximity has an opportunity to stay there. And I think for individuals that do that short-term lodging, that notice should be made that it is close to an airport. I think that does make sense. In terms of the actual services that we're rendering, it has not come up during any of the services that we're rendering. But I do think for the lodging, that does make sense to provide notice.
Good. I really do, I appreciate that. And I understand we can't address every concern 100%. I just felt it was necessary to have just a little more discussion, so.
I figured when you were in hydrotherapy, the white noise from hydrotherapy
Right.
around that
You hope so.
Massage therapy, I'm not listening to anything on massage.
Yes, thank you.
We just had a big discussion with the city council on pickleball and a massage therapist that was near there, so I'm just, so. I appreciate your willingness to have that extra notice. I do appreciate that very much. Thank you. And thank you for letting me know that you're having services there too. That, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Other questions by board members?
Just really a comment. Alice, you may not know I fly. If you take a look at the map, this is located parallel to the runway, and the majority of noise from an aircraft is going to be on takeoff. It's when that engine
Yes.
is running up and they're pulling up and out. By the time they get out into the C1 zone, they're in the pattern. They're at 1,000 feet or higher. And so it's kind of background noise. And for guys like me, you know, if you hear an interesting engine, you run outside to take a look at what it is anyway, right? Out of curiosity. So I understand your concern. We obviously in Lincoln get some complaints about noise from the aircraft as well. A lot of times that's folks who, you know, moved in knowing full well that there was an airport there and then decided they didn't like it. So, but you're talking triple pane glass, correct?
I believe that, yeah, that is the recommendation.
You can put that into a house next to a freeway and not hear any traffic, so.
The only other question that I have is that this is subject to the recommended conditions, but they're not required conditions, or we're just making a recommendation of these conditions, or are we saying that we would approve this, or, you know, find this consistency so long as these conditions are met, or is it just a suggestion?
Well, okay, so you could, if you would like to have those be required, the commission can put forward required, but ultimately the Board of Supervisors
Makes the ultimate
will make
decision.
a decision, and if they choose to, they would have to act on a supermajority vote to overturn any recommendation that comes from the ALUC. So over the years, we've always used the phrase recommended versus required. They would need to act in a supermajority vote in order to overturn those recommended conditions.
Overturn the recommended, not required. Okay, thank you.
Trinity has a question.
Thank you.
Okay, that looks like Trinity has a question.
Yeah, if the board's amicable to it, I just wanted to make sure that the non-glare requirement for the solar panels is a requirement, just because the reality is that those solar panels can be extremely reflective, and making sure that they're non-reflective, I think, is very important. So if the board's amicable to it, I'd like that to be a requirement.
It's listed as a recommendation, correct, staff?
Correct, yeah. So if the board wishes to change the, subject to the recommended conditions and change that phrase to subject to required conditions, that's, a board, decision.
So is there any downside to making them required versus recommended? Again, I understand ultimately the decision lies with the Board of Supervisors. It would take a supermajority vote to overrule either a recommended or required, or?
Correct.
So
there's no downside from our perspective. Yeah, it's just in terms of history.
Sure, precedent
Prior
is that we've always
executive
done a
directors have always wanted
recommendation.
to use recommended versus required. So.
And what is the, maybe my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors, do they generally, is it generally true that they will support the recommendations that come out of this
Well, I've been
public
working
hearing?
on this since 2012, and I have not yet seen an overturn by the board
Okay,
on an ALUC recommended conditions.
okay, thank you. I think this is the first time that I've actually had a project at the airport, Auburn Airport, while sitting on PCTPA, so I appreciate my colleagues' patience with me on this issue. So,
Okay, any other questions? No, okay, I'll open it up for a public hearing.
Madam Chair,
Oh, yes,
I have full confidence that the applicant will fulfill all the recommendations. And I've been to the project, I've gone over the project with the applicants, and I'm very comfortable with the way they're going to proceed.
okay, so.
and they're gonna put the notice, so I like that too.
Yeah.
So I believe we have to open this up for a public hearing, correct? Okay, open this for a public hearing. Please, welcome.
Hi, Michael Garabedian. Thank you for this helpful discussion to understand this. I haven't reviewed the project, so I don't feel in any position to take a position for it or against it. I think the changing it to requirements certainly sounds like a good idea. I will say this, though, which I don't know that it's actually in your authority, because just as a member of the public and an older person too, the question is, why is this there in the first place near the airport? Aren't there a million other places this could go? Do we really have to be dealing with as a noise issue for old folks by the airport? And I just wanted to mention that as something that comes to mind. And I appreciate, again, your work on this and discussion. Very good.
Thank you. Any more comments? Seeing none here, anyone on Zoom would like to comment? Okay, well, I guess I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the board.
Madam Chair, if I may, first of all, I'd like to compliment David. You anticipated my questions and concerns brilliantly, and that's the reason I didn't have any questions or any follow-up, really. So if there's nothing more from the board, I'll go ahead and make the motion to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, hearing, first and second.
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Cortez.
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Holmes.
Aye.
Howdeshelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, moving on to item J. Consent calendar, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency. Again, these items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted on by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or citizen may request an item be removed from the consent calendar. Would any board member like to remove anything from the?
I have none.
No. No. Here? Okay, hearing none. You have a motion
Calvillo, second.
and a second.
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes. Sorry, wouldn't let me come off mute for a second there.
Cortez.
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Holmes.
Aye.
Howdeshelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, moving on to item K, fiscal year 2022-23 overall work program and budget amendment number 2. Jody LaCosta.
Good morning, Chair and Board. My presentation actually covers items K and L, but I will take a break at the end of K so you can take action.
Okay.
This is the final adjustment for the 22-23 fiscal year. It's Amendment 2. There were a few adjustments made. First is the indirect cost increased. We did get the approved indirect cost rate from Caltrans. It is 35.27% for this year, and that has been amended in this budget. Additionally, we added some increased costs in the indirect for a website revamp and some shifting in staff. Direct cost increases was $117,000, and that included some I-80 aux lanes. It was a $424,000 increase for the Roseville tree mitigation and some $12,000 for permit fees. Highway 65 widening configuration consultant, we had a decrease of $160,000, which will be expended in the next fiscal year. And Riego baseline fair share analysis consultant had a reduction of $147,000. Again, that will be expended in the following fiscal year. Salaries and benefits did have a decrease of $39,000, and that was the adjustment of the overlap of the executive director and getting the actual cost included in there. And this is just an overview of the changes from Amendment 1. We do have a balanced budget with a surplus of $287,000. And this amendment has been reviewed by Caltrans, and unless there are any questions, this ends item K, and staff recommends approval.
Okay, board members, any questions? No? Okay, no, Trinity? Okay, hearing none?
None for
Thanks, Trinity. Okay, hearing none, I need a.
Move approval.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot I didn't mean to forget you, Mr. Garabedian, please.
Thank you. Good morning again. Mike Garabedian, Placer County Tomorrow. The part of this that I object to has to do with the auxiliary lane, continuing of that project, which from my point of view, when that entire interchange was completed with the tunnel and the additions, that was a masterful transportation planning project. And meddling with it like this, reducing the number of lanes coming off, I know that there's certainly disagreement that that's a problem or a hazard, but I believe it will be unsafe. So that part of this I oppose. Thank you.
Okay, any comments on that? Okay, and anyone else on Zoom for public comment? No.
Anyone? No?
Okay. Do I have a motion for that?
Yes, I'll move approval of the fiscal year 2023-24 overall work.
Howard seconds.
Okay,
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Cortez.
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Holmes.
Aye.
Houdeshelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, so moving on to item L. Thank you, Jody.
So this is the final OWP and budget for next fiscal year for 2023-24, and the adjustments that were made from the preliminary draft that was presented to you in February. We did increase revenue 1.5 million. Most of that is our federal CMAQ HIP grants for Highway 49. Direct costs increased 1.5. Again, that was the bulk of that was for the Highway 49 project. Staff remains the same at 7 FTE, and there were no changes with the indirect cost. And then here is a look of the difference between the final and the draft and Amendment 2 that you just passed. And again, Caltrans has reviewed this, and they did have some language changes that have been incorporated in the OWP. And unless there are any questions, staff recommends approval.
Okay. No questions. Board members? No?
I have a curiosity that may go off way too far into the weeds, but I'll ask real quick. Since we appear to be moving into a 6-county funding round, is SACOG going to have to be engaged in this process in future years?
Of our OWP?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, very good. Okay, public comment.
Mike Garabedian again. Same comment about the auxiliary lane, continuing with that. And what I hope is that no one ever comes before you and says, I told you so. There are accidents there now.
Thank you, Mr. Garabedian. All right. Okay, seeing no, do I hear a motion?
Dowden Calvillo, second.
Okay.
Defer.
She's quick on the draw.
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Cortez.
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Holmes.
Aye.
Houdeshelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, we'll move on to item M. Now we'll discuss the I-80 Auxiliary Lanes Project. First Amendment to the Utility Agreement Number 2452.1. Mr. Malco.
Okay, so switching from airports and planes to highways. Okay, we're requesting the board today to adopt Resolution 2319 to approve the First Amendment to the Utility Agreement 2452.1. This amendment deals with the activation of 2 gas lines resulting from construction of the I-80 Auxiliary Lanes project. And secondly, we're requesting that you authorize the executive director to execute the said agreement, disperse funds as required by the amended agreement upon his satisfactory determination that the costs to deactivate the 2 gas lines are actual and necessary. And the actual and necessary phrase is language that's included within the utility agreement.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. You said activate and then you said deactivate, so.
Deactivate.
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 Maybe I just didn't hear the D the first time.
I could have I could have mispronounced, yeah. So those are the two actions, and I do have a PowerPoint that summarizes the staff report and the material provided in the 4 attachments, which is a fair amount of material. So, background, the Ideal Auxiliary Lanes project, there's 2 locations. The first location, we're adding truly an eastbound auxiliary lane from State Route 65 to Rockland Road. In the second location, we are adding a 5th westbound lane from Douglas Boulevard to Riverside Avenue. And this will connect with the 5th lane that's in Sacramento County, and basically is a gap closure project. So as I noted, PG&E has 2 gas lines conflicting with the project. And there is a map that follows this slide. And the first location is the crossing from Sunrise Boulevard to a parcel known as Strout-Stevenson. It's along South Harding Boulevard. And the second location is a crossing from Melrose Avenue to Sunrise Avenue. And initially, or originally, PG&E estimated the cost to remove and relocate the 2 gas lines at approximately $255,000. And the liability was established at 50/50. The state has a master freeway contract with PG&E. And in September of '21, this board approved the utility agreement, and establishing the liability for us at approximately $127,000. And this is the location of the 2 gas pipelines. And location 1, basically it's South Harding Boulevard, crosses a parcel known as Strout-Stevenson, then crosses Interstate 80 over to Sunrise Avenue, and then proceeds down south on Sunrise Avenue. And the second location is at Melrose Avenue and crosses Interstate 80 over to just shy of Sunrise Avenue. In May of '22, we completed what was considered, or what was labeled as an 89% progress payment to PG&E for approximately $113,000. And PG&E completed the work in August of '22. They had approval from Caltrans to backfill the 2 gas lines with slurry fill rather than remove those gas lines. As you can appreciate, removing gas lines underneath the interstate would have caused tremendous disruption, to traffic on the freeway. In October '22, PG&E submitted their final invoice for approximately $655,000, with our share established at $327,000. So the difference between the $113,000 that we paid and the $327,000 is approximately $214,000 that we have as a balance. And as you can appreciate, we questioned the cost increase, the reasons provided, and requested backup documentation, including copies of construction invoices. And all of this material is identified in the attachments. You'll see the letter from Matt and the subsequent email correspondence with PG&E. And in February, we apprised the board of the project construction bid and PG&E cost increases. So if you recall, we came before the board with a construction co-op where we were requesting an increase due to the bids of approximately $8 million in order to accommodate those bid increases, the lowest bidder, as well as the PG&E cost increases. And that same February, the Sparta board acted to allocate additional monies towards the project, to fund those cost increases. So, and PG&E has indicated the primary reasons for the cost increases are severalfold, and I'll kind of walk through this. And we do have representatives from PG&E here today on the Zoom call who will be able to respond to board questions. And they indicated there's unanticipated delays in determining the gas lines and casing locations. And I will note that this is not entirely uncommon, because we have experienced as part of this project, Dock and Engineering is here today, as part of our engineering team, where the as-builts for this freeway, which go back to like 1970, were not, everything that we thought was shown on the as-built was not always exactly in the location that it should have been. And we have water utility lines and sewer pipelines that we found through boring and ground testing that were not exactly in the locations that were shown on the maps. So it wasn't a complete surprise that PG&E had some issues in determining the gas line locations based upon, utility history, I suppose. They also indicated that they received delays in receiving Caltrans approvals, and they had to resubmit traffic control plans, both to Caltrans and to Roseville, to gain their approvals to do the work. And there was more traffic control needed on Sunrise Avenue than anticipated. And as a result of that, there was also more night work than originally anticipated. They underestimated the amount of paving required. And they did admit that there was an error in the overhead calculation. And I believe in one of the emails, if you look through the email correspondence, there was a clarification from PG&E with respect to what should have been the proper number for overhead assigned to this particular project. And lastly, the project just took more time. The estimate was 4 weeks, and it actually took 7 weeks to complete the work. And we had a conference call with PG&E. We had the PG&E staff, us, Docket Engineering, who's our consulting. I think our attorney was also on the conference call. It was early January to talk through all of these issues. And subsequently, there was a site visit. Rick Carter, our deputy executive director, went out into the field to meet with the PG&E engineering staff to get a better understanding of the problems that generated the cost increase. And as I noted, there were email correspondence, which is attached, where we tried to obtain the copies of construction invoices so we could determine that the costs are actual and necessary. So the utility agreement requires the current utility agreement that this board approved requires us to pay the actual and necessary costs of work up to 125%. And at the time in August, when the project was completed, we were under the assumption that we would be within that 125%. So as part of the overall work program amendment that came to the board in that fiscal year, we budgeted an additional $32,000 to go up to the 125%, which that was approved in October of 21, and of course we received a letter later in October indicating that the true cost of the project was closer to $650, and so our share would have increased. And so the staff report includes the utility agreement amendment, and it's fairly boilerplate. It's the typical type of utility agreement that Caltrans has with PG&E up and down the state. And there's not much, I suppose, to debate within the contents of the utility agreement. And upon your approval, PCTPA will owe the balance of $214,000 to PG&E. And the funding for this particular amount will come from Sparta, because the board approved the cost and allocation increase for the project, as well as locally controlled federal funds that we have. And I will note that the locally controlled federal funds that we have do have a time limit on them. And so they would need to be used up by September 30th of this year. So we are recommending that you approve the utility agreement amendment with PG&E. And second step would be that you authorize the executive director, to execute and disperse the funds as required by the amended agreement upon a satisfactory determination that costs to deactivate the 2 gas lines are actual and necessary. Now, we met with PG&E yesterday, and we had sort of a walkthrough, and as part of that discussion yesterday morning, we also talked about how we would need to have subsequent discussions with them in order for Matt basically to make the determination that the costs are actual and necessary. So approving the agreement today is an important step, but there will be some subsequent steps that still need to occur interacting with PG&E in order to get to that, lack of a better phrase, comfort level on that the costs are actual and necessary. So with that, I would be,
And if I may, through the chair, to just repeat something that David's already said, we had a very good initial conversation with PG&E yesterday, and I want to thank them for making themselves available to us. And Tess and her team is on the Zoom call today as well to answer any questions, as David said. So, I think, following the action today, we can, have a follow-up conversation, have dialogue with them, and get to that point of comfort, upon conversation, documentation, to make sure we have all of those, costs and understand that they are necessary and actual. So I'm confident we can come to that, in working with PG&E. And I just wanted to thank them for making themselves available today.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, David. Appreciate the presentation. With regard to the board, are there any questions?
Yes, I have a lot. So thank you. Thank you to PG&E for for making themselves available. I'm glad to hear that conversation. I just have some basic questions. I mean, this started off as gas line relocation, and it was bid as a gas line relocation, but then it ended up changing to a slurry seal, not a relocation. So that just made me curious how a project that was bid to be more robust than it actually did could have such an increase in cost.
I think that's a question that PG&E would need to address. And their project manager is here today to address that question. So if Tess could jump in and respond to that question. Tess, you're on mute.
Tess, you're on mute.
Oh, she can't hear you. We can't hear you, Tess. Can you hear us?
Tess, you're on mute.
Probably has to go to her settings.
So is there a way that the
There you go.
program manager on Zoom can unmute her, perhaps, Sylvie? Perhaps?
I keep asking her to unmute.
I think
Jeremy, I
Darren
don't
is
think
trying
she
to
can
text her
hear us.
right now.
Okay.
Somebody on the PG&E team text Tess.
And let me say thank you to our PCTPA team for including the robust, the background on the robust conversations you've had since this came up. They're very helpful, so.
I'm sure it's a great response.
Yeah, I don't, she might.
Darren, Jason, or do you guys have the ability to communicate with Tess through a chat or through texting her?
To let her know that, clearly she can't hear us, I don't.
She must have, because she started answering the question.
Yeah, but then when we said we couldn't hear you, she just kept talking.
Somebody just told her, I think.
Chair, if I could use this moment, I just wanted to point out that I'm recusing myself from this item due to my employment by PG&E.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Sorry, everybody. Good morning. This is Jason. Can you hear us okay?
We can
Jason,
hear
we can hear you
Jason.
fine.
yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So Tess was explaining that. Did you guys not catch the last minute or two? And I do
Any of it.
apologize. if
We
there's
could
audio
not, yeah,
issues.
we could not hear any thing that she shared with us.
Sorry, guys. Tess, would you mind repeating that?
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Oh,
Yes, now we
there
can.
we go.
Yes.
We're in the same conference room. We tried to simplify it, but this is what happened. So.
Gotcha.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so in regards to the gas line relocation, so the contributing factors to the overrun are unanticipated project delays, standby, pending Caltrans approval to not pull pipe out of casing, which delayed our project even further, to determine scope change to the plans, positive location, approximately 3 additional weeks to determine the pipe and casing locations, and anticipated project expenses such as night work, extensive traffic control on Sunrise due to traffic, and in addition to that, excavation. So we had to wait for Caltrans to provide us an approval in order for us to proceed with our change work plan.
Tess, I think the board member's question was originally this project was scoped as deactivating the gas lines and relocating them. And we ended up not relocating, well, we deactivated the gas lines, but we did not relocate. Instead, you came to an agreement with Caltrans to backfill with Slurryville. And so I think the board member's question was, if it was originally scoped as a deactivation and relocation with a cost at $254,000, and instead you came to an agreement with Caltrans to deactivate and backfill with Slurryville, and then there was a cost of $650. How did we go from one to the other? Am I capturing?
Because there were added excavations that were unanticipated during construction. So again, as you stated originally, that when you had the as-built for Caltrans, from Caltrans in regards to the Highway 80, we couldn't find the existing gas line. So therefore, the excavation had to occur additional weeks in order for, and again, we still couldn't find the gas line, the existing gas line.
So it was really, it was the extra work that you, I'm sorry. So it was the extra work needed to locate your gas line that cost extra money and would have occurred regardless of your actual relocation or backfill slurry. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Wow.
I'm sorry to interrupt,
That's all
Alice.
I
I
got
just
to
wanted
say.
to add that another contributing factor is PG&E's estimating. We have a history of undervaluating complex utility relocations. It's a very hard thing to pinpoint an accurate cost on. So we do have internal processes underway to improve that, to make our estimates more accurate. But I would say that PG&E has a history of underestimating how expensive these projects could be. So that is definitely a contributing factor as well.
Thank you for your candidness. That's not comforting.
Right. We should have had an extra 20% or something.
So, Mr. Melker, you mentioned that we have a time in which to, I want to make sure the words are used correctly. Utilize the funding?
The federal funding is 2019-20 HIP funds, and they come with a 3-year time frame. And so that was established by Congress. And so those funds need to be used by September 30th. Otherwise, they would revert back.
When you say those funds, does that mean?
The HIP funds, the 100.
No, I understand that, but what is use of those funds? I mean, does we have to have pavement down?
We have to have payment completed by then.
Pavement, I'm sorry.
Payment.
You have to pay the bill.
You need to pay the bill, spend the funds.
I'm asking if that substantial progress is pavement, not just payment.
Oh.
Not just incremental projects.
The slurry.
Progress towards the ultimate installation of the project.
I think,
I'm missing the question.
I think I understand the question.
Yeah,
and,
I mean, if we pay PG&E.
Right.
That doesn't build the project.
No.
Do we have to use that money to build the project by September 30th?
We have to,
2030?
as an agency, take those federal dollars that have been allocated to us and spend them by September. We have currently.
Okay. Doesn't matter what we spend them on.
Doesn't matter. And yeah.
I'm sorry, I was.
That's okay.
I was too convoluted in my question. But this is more than, and I appreciate PG&E's candor, but this is more than troubling.
I just want to understand, the as-builts came from Caltrans, but the gas line is PG&E's and would have been placed by PG&E originally, yes?
Well, my understanding of the as-built is they're supposed to show everything that exists within the freeway right away, whether it was built by Caltrans or various utilities. And so, the last major freeway project, actually, I'm going to correct myself, was the bottleneck project. And so, that was in, the early 2000s here. But in this particular section, the the as-bills date till like the 1970s, late 70s.
You know, back then, they kind of just said, okay, we're gonna be there, but we're gonna move it over another 50 yards because we hit a rock or something, or hey, you know.
For Jim and I, the 70s was like yesterday.
Me too.
But
No,
where I still am is, did PG&E put in the gas line? And if PG&E put in the gas line and submitted their as-bills to Caltrans,
I would assume.
Look, let's not try to be logical.
Why don't we,
I
if
would
we could
assume the
through the
gas line
chair.
was implemented by PG&E because
Yeah. Why don't we ask PG&E
existed
to-
back then, but that would be a PG&E question. I would assume that the as-bills would properly reflect what PG&E gave Caltrans back in the 70s. We don't really have a way.
and so let's close that loop. If PG&E had their original as-bills wrong, and that resulted in this increased expenditure, how does that fall on our shoulders?
If I could, through the chair, could we ask Jason? Jason, go ahead. I see you're trying to get in here. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, and I forgot about the hand raising, so that's my fault. So thank you, Paul. Thank you, David, for explaining that. As-built, if it was a PG&E installed gas line, the as-built data would come from us to share with the agency to put on their maps. So as-built aren't precise. A lot of our facilities date back centuries. I understand these gas lines probably are not that old, but they do give an approximate location of the facilities. Now, I'm not an engineer. I'm just a land rights guy, so just giving you the best answer I can. But they do show the location of our facilities fairly accurately. So some vary, and it sounds like this one was not as accurate as most.
Well, obviously, I've still got some significant concerns here. We have to take action today. I am somewhat comforted by the fact that this conversation will continue and that Matt will have the final say on how we move forward. I think like most of us, I'm not real happy with these increases.
David, how long have we been asking for detail regarding the costs?
Well, the package shows that we got the invoice like around October 20th, and a letter from Matt came on board when he came on board in November. And so that letter went out and basically asked all the questions about the cost increases, including copies of documentation. And we got a response letter back, which indicated the reasons why the costs increased. And the PowerPoint, where I have the 7 bullets or so that show the reasons, capture from that particular letter. And then from there, you add the holiday season. And we met with PG&E in early January and did a site visit. And we asked for construction invoices, and for reasons that I think PG&E are best able to explain, we're reluctant to release those construction invoices, to us. And so that's something that I think they're best capable of addressing. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's been in place since November.
Okay, so for the PG&E team, can you provide this body with an explanation for why your organization would be hesitant to supply us with the information necessary to justify this increased expenditure of funds?
I can talk about that. Yeah, hi, Ken. This is Jason again. So within the utility agreement, that's the contract that PCTPA and PG&E signed. There's a provision or a clause in there that allows the agency, which is you guys, to audit our books. You guys have every right to do that. But you can't audit Tess, you can't audit Darren and I or Brandon. We're just the foot soldiers. You guys have every right to perform an audit. If there's any federal funding, that clause is typically in there. It's a formal action. You send a team of analysts or attorneys down to a PG&E location, and you could audit the books. So to say that we're withholding that, I don't know if that's accurate. We just can't provide you invoices to our contractor because that is between us and them. But you do have the right to audit our books if you so choose. I just wanted to point that out.
All right, so what you're asking of us then is to trust you when you've increased the cost of this project almost threefold. So we can't get any detail. I can audit your books. I'm not sure I completely understand what that looks like relative to the request for the invoice detail. But if you're doing work, and I suspect if I look at some of the projects that have been done in the city of Rockland, which I represent, and if we were to do work on your behalf, and we came to you and said, by the way, the costs have now gone up 300%, you can come audit, and I just did my budget, so you can look at my budget and see what I've budgeted for these type of expenses, but no, I'm not gonna give you any detail. I don't think PG&E would be overly receptive, so I'm struggling a bit. I wouldn't have a problem if you had increased costs. I know that costs increase. You have unexpected issues. This was clearly the case here. There's simply been a request for invoice detail that supports this. Now, I don't know exactly how auditing your books, and I guess we would need an explanation of what that means outside of what our staff is asking you for relative to detail. We need detail. We're being asked to expend a significantly larger amount of money. We've asked for detail that's not been provided in a sufficient manner. So how do we get there? Because that's also part of the approval that's being requested today, is that Matt be able to secure that detail in order to move this process forward. So can someone help me in this body understand how we get there? What is it going to take? Again, I don't think auditing the books, at least because that sounds like to me, it sounds like a 35,000 foot response without detail. So how do we get there so we can say with confidence that we understand these increases and that they were valid increases in the expenditures that correlate to this project?
Yeah, thank you, Ken. If I could just add on, we've had a few months of back and forth with PCTPA and have been very responsive all along. We have significant email correspondences with a ton of details. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to review those yet.
Oh, yeah.
David did say he provided those as attachments, so I hope a lot of your questions are answered within those attachments.
Oh, yeah.
But we have specific breakdowns and numbers. Again, these are actual costs that we pull directly from SAP, and we present the final invoice to you. There's no buffering. This is not a money-making machine for PG&E. We are just relocating facilities. We were asked to relocate and providing the bill. We try to keep costs as low as possible, and we provide a lot of details in these overrun letters because we understand it's a serious issue, and we try to communicate that early and often.
Well, and I have reviewed the materials that were provided. I will say that it's truly lacking to me as not only a member of this board, but as a business professional for 37 years, I can tell you, working for a multi-billion-dollar company, that if I brought this to any of my executives and said the description that you have here is the information I have relative to an increase of almost 300% in the cost of a project I was responsible for, I think I would walk out of the room wondering if I was going to have a job. So again, we've asked for detail. I'm struggling to understand why we can't get that detail and why it's so problematic for that information to be supplied. If you were expensed for that, why are we unable to get correlation back to that outside of general descriptions that are provided in this documentation? So that is a concern for me. And that's all I have, Suzanne, so thank you.
No.
Madam Chair, and for PG&E, curious what your process is for auditing your subcontractors. You gave us a long list of costs for paving, you know, for traffic management, you know, looking at this, I might be looking at the wrong page, but it seems like the significant change were both in traffic control and potholing. How many potholes did you fill? Right? Some of this is, yeah. So the question is largely about PG&E's own auditing to ensure that their contractors are delivering things. I'm not finding my words correctly, but I think you know what I mean.
Guess we bring it back to the board. We need to act on this.
Public comment?
Oh, let's do open for public comment.
Mike Garabedian, Placer County Tomorrow. Thank you for these excellent conversations that you're talking about. The conversations I would like to know about are the conversations with the engineers in, I assume in Marysville headquarters, that did the original planning for this huge interchange. And I would want to know if they considered this as part of that major reconstruction. I guess then I'd like to know whatever they did or didn't do then, what do they think of it now? And maybe these two conversations have been had somewhere in this process. I think I should also point out that when I first heard of this auxiliary lane here, I told this board that I supported that idea. But then I found out it was to happen by reducing the 2 lanes that come out of the main traffic lanes and off. And I felt that could be a backup and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garabedian.
Madam Chair, I'll move approval of the item.
Yeah, no.
I'll second for the purposes of discussion.
Yeah.
I'd like to just ask staff, I mean, your recommendation is that we move forward and approve the First Amendment to the utility agreement to adjust these costs. What happens if we don't? So do we lose those monies? We talked about we had to spend the federal funds by a date certain. Can you just talk about what the consequence is if we were not to do that today? If we were not to approve the agreement today, the amendment?
So if we tabled this and it took this up in June, it just tightens the timeline for the use of the federal funds. Now, the federal funds that we have are actually federal funds allocated to the final design phase. So we have co-op agreements pending that need to be put in place, transferring the money from final design to right-of-way. This is part of the right-of-way phase. Those can't be executed until this board executes and Matt signs this utility agreement, PG&E signs that utility agreement. Then, I hate to get into detail here, but Caltrans has a process where we go through, it's called request for authorization. So those federal funds then have to then go through local assistance to headquarters and get FHWA approval. And that's probably a 6 weeks process. So if you were to approve it today, and let's say Matt was to sign this tomorrow, which is not likely, but hypothetical.
Matt's shaking his head.
Hypothetical, that we probably would get those federal funds to be able to pay PG&E by the end of July.
Okay.
So if we wait till June, it just pushes us probably into late August, early September.
And September 30th is the date, the deadline?
Yeah, well, for the federal funds.
Okay.
Now, if you choose to say, well, do something else with the federal funds, keep them on final design. We have we've talked about it internally. We'll have difficulty spending those funds, all of those federal funds, on the final design phase because technically final design is completed because we put out bids for the project and we went through the whole bid process, and so final design is basically completed and we're going into construction. That said, we could spend some of those federal funds, but we will probably end up losing or giving back to the state some of those funds. You do have Sparta funds allocated to this project because at the time, we sort of as a contingency, we came to the board as part of the construction cost increase and the 8 million with respect to the bids, we added the 214,000 that we owe here, for the PG&E. And of course, the board had a lot of questions about PG&E back then, and the cost increase. So you do have that backstop. In terms of, I guess, the more extreme scenario, what if we just don't approve the utility agreement amendment? I mean, there's, I believe, clauses that deal with arbitration, and so it would go through that process. And, ultimately, we will, whatever process we go through, we'll probably end up at some point down the line making a payment to PG&E because we will owe some amount of money. And we will then, at that point, once that is clear, have to work with PG&E because the right-of-way where this sits, Sparta owns, but it has an easement on it that PG&E has that we will need to get them to quit claim in order for us to then go to the city of Roseville to get that easement abandoned, and so that we can then give to the state clear freeway right-of-way, the title for that. And this project is a 2-year project, and all of this would need to be accomplished by the end of summer of 2024. So as your project manager, I felt bad coming before this board in February, about the construction cost increase, but I really can't control the state of the industry and the economy and inflation and just the way, contractors are bidding. But we have worked hard with PG&E to try to get, these particular, an idea on the construction cost increases. And as you can appreciate, we don't have the staff here really we'd have to rely upon Duncan Engineering to go through the invoices. And it's not the question of the veracity of PG&E with respect to that they're trying to make money here or do some sort of scheme, with respect to the invoices. It's just in my background, in terms of when I used to work at Sacramento Regional Transit, there were many times on projects where we would get an invoice for a project and, it'd be to a subcontractor, and the subcontractor would send, the invoice would be one invoice for all of the work they've done for that particular prime, and including work on my particular project. So we want to make sure that when we go through there that somebody in accounting didn't necessarily reassign a cost from one particular project to us to have to pay for. And we can't do that. So at this point, we have to rely upon, the veracity of PG&E, that everything here is accurate. And so.
Delaying this another meeting, I don't know what it's going to get us if we're not going to be able to get the level of detail that we'd like to have, or our comfort level, I think, really, is what we're, so I think, because, if there's no reason there's no benefit of delaying because we're not going to get that additional information, then our option is we don't approve it, but we do have to work with PG&E on that easement issue and so forth, and the services have been rendered. I think what's really frustrating for me, and I appreciate PG&E's candor when they said that they often underestimate. There really needs to be an overhaul at PG&E to account for these kinds of things. I mean, we all know that things that were put in the ground decades and decades ago, the maps that show where they are may not actually reflect where they are. I mean, that exists, that happens on properties. When we as cities are moving things around, we think that we have a sewer line right over here, but maybe it's over 10 feet or what have you. So I appreciate that happens, but really there needs to be more of an effort from PG&E to ensure that you're providing accurate estimates, because it is very frustrating for us. And we can't see that level of detail because of your practice with regards to the subcontracting work. So you said that you're working on that. I really hope that you are, so that we can, in the future, get accurate estimates. But I don't think that not taking action on this item is going to be beneficial to us. So my second to the approval does stand.
And
So,
Alice, thank you for that. I appreciate it, and I see this the same way. We are also providing to Matt the authority to make this decision based upon review and receipt of the necessary information. He's the professional. I know that he'll work to ensure that we have the information. It's unfortunate. I think it's unfortunate that it's taken this long, I think it's unfortunate that we have such a large increase without detail relative to that increase. I think it's unfortunate that PG&E has a known issue relative to under forecasting for the costs, and that hasn't been addressed, especially for the size of an organization like PG&E. But in the end of the day, I would be hesitant to make a decision to delay when that would result in us having to pull funds from Sparta that we currently have available federally, which would only have a negative impact on us and those we're attempting to serve. So Alice, great questions. Thank you for that, and I also support the motion.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Melko, how much money is that on the line here?
Well, the federal funds are approximately 183,000 and change.
So we're gonna pay 224 for 183.
Yeah, 214, but.
214,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
And we're gonna take away your, Mr. Click's ability to have an important conversation with PG&E about I love veracity, that was the word I was looking for. The veracity of their subcontractor, their contractors, their vendor costs. We're gonna take that away by making a motion today to go ahead and pay this, not contingent upon anything else. Because I didn't hear any contingency in that. We're just gonna say, okay, go ahead.
So I think what we're doing is authorizing the
Yeah.
executive director, if he thinks it's appropriate, to make those expenditures.
And if I could, through the chair, maybe offer something, because this is a lot of good conversation here, and I can understand, members of the board and their level of uncomfort with this. And I appreciate the motion, and I appreciate your confidence in me to negotiate this with PG&E on behalf of PCTPA. I would offer that I think a contingency would be in order, and maybe I could offer, if you want to make this motion, approving the two actions, that we can move forward, we can amend the utility agreement, we can get all of that paperwork processed, you can authorize me to begin to have conversations with Tess and her team, and then what we can do is contingent upon coming back before this board in June, in person, and having the rest of this conversation that satisfies the board's questions to a degree, and we can collaborate with PG&E to understand what bit of financial information is that they can share with us and not share with us. But essentially, we can continue this conversation in June, have them present, make sure all of you are satisfied, and then the next day we can execute if the board is satisfied. So maybe I would offer that as a contingency.
Yeah, no, that would,
Director Howdish.
that would comfort me a lot, and I think all of us see the importance of this project, right? The importance not only for freight, but for life safety. I mean, if you're, like I did this morning, if you're coming off of 65 and merging onto 80 to go east, having that auxiliary lane is real important as everybody's barreling up at more. I think they think that it says 80 because they think that's the speed limit, right? Of course.
I'm on it every day.
Yep, and so none of what I'm saying is to diminish the importance of this project, but we also, and I think everyone on this board recognizes whether the funds are coming from taxpayers. Well, the funds are coming from taxpayers.
Yes, they are.
Because they're coming from the federal government. And we have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that we're spending, in every amendment that we're doing, we're spending theirs with our eyes wide open, right? So I just wanted to say that, and I really do appreciate all the detail in the package. I appreciate PG&E being responsive since last fall to our staff's questions, and I appreciate, you were on the job by, on 5 days or something, and I appreciate you getting out a letter promptly. So I think PG&E has gotten the message about our concern loud and clear, and I certainly do understand, what some of my fellow board members are saying about things in the 1970s when I was in sophomore in high school.
So,
Do we need a
Madam
second
Chair.
motion, or?
No,
Yeah.
I don't, well, no, we can modify to that. I don't, from a point of clarity, I don't believe that's necessary. I believe the way that the requested approval is written, we accomplish that. We're authorizing Matt to secure the necessary information and then to make that decision to move forward. If he felt he did not have that information, he would subsequently bring this back to us, informing us that he didn't have the information to do so, versus him just saying, let's move forward. And I would prefer that that be the approach, is if he doesn't have the information, he comes back to us. If he is able to secure the information, we as a body are being asked to say, secure that information, move this forward. If he secures that, to delay this to June, to simply have him come back and tell us he's done exactly what we've directed here, I think is an unnecessary delay and places a risk, because we all know things happen, such as not being able to find a pipe and having increasing costs of a project. So I believe we have what's necessary to move this forward to ensure timely processing, subject to receiving the information necessary as opposed to delaying it. That's my opinion.
And if we can adopt the motion that's on the table now, then with a consensus, we can ask you to bring it back if you feel that you don't have the information necessary, just as Ken mentioned.
That's
so.
a given. So with that, I'll call the question.
Yeah, and thank you, Member Broadway, for having, my eyes were clouded by emotion. And I didn't see the, see the satisfactory determination
yeah.
language.
All right,
Thank you.
so necessary.
Thank you, Mayor Joyner, for the clean answer.
Okay.
Got no members of the public. We got a motion and a second. Okay, Broadway.
Yes.
Cortez.
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Holmes.
Aye.
Howard.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Good. Okay, good job, everybody. Okay, we're gonna move on to item N, Regional Transportation Plan, a 2050 draft policy element. And it looks like Corey and Mike?
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the board. It's good to be here with you this morning, and I think we'll dive into a much lighter topic of talking about policies for our regional transportation plan. Just kidding. So we wanted to bring this item before you. It's not an action item. We're not asking you to adopt anything. We're just bringing this forward to kind of give you an overview of what we've been working on for our regional transportation plan update, and get your feedback on some of the new policies that we're proposing in our draft policy element. Before I do that, though, I did want to just touch on something that was brought up at the last board meeting by Director Howard. He had asked a question after we kind of gave an overview of the outreach, the community outreach that we did in the fall, and asked about, we presented some survey results that said that Placer County residents are looking for pothole repair, and they're looking for more lanes to help reduce congestion, and if there's a statewide survey that says the same to that effect. So we did some digging. I won't go through all these individually in the interest of time, but found that, in general, road maintenance and kind of congestion relief is pretty top priority across the board. There were some areas that ranked other things like multimodal improvements higher than others, depending on where you are in the state. But suffice to say that there are some similar opinions to Placer County here across the state in different areas like Riverside and Merced, and then slightly differing opinions on the coastal areas like Mendocino and Monterey. All right, so diving into the policy element. So we first came to this board back in February of 2022 to kind of kick off the RTP update process, and it's a multi-year process, and we've been kind of working diligently on it since then. The reason we're bringing this to you now is because here in the kind of the fall, late fall, spring timeline, we're going to start talking about a preferred project list for the RTP with SACOG. And so we kind of want to have our policy element ready to kind of show support for what our public wants, what our board wants, and what types of projects need to be in the plan. For the most part, what we did was we went and consolidated and revamped the policy element. I'll show a slide in a second that shows the number of policies that we had, but suffice to say it was about 19 pages. It was a long element, and so we tried to consolidate like policies and kind of make it more concise and more readable. We also added in, you're welcome. We also added in new items like things addressing CAPTI, the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure that was passed by the state last year or the year before. We added in more things on electrification, and we're also looking at addressing equity in our policy element as well from a Placer County perspective. So this kind of, again, outlines the kind of how we went in and consolidated all of our policies. We were at 140 policies before the system are adopted, 2040 RCP, and we've cut that down to approximately about a third of that, and we're basically saying the same exact thing. So we tried to keep the same themes and then kind of added in new things that we're, adding in essentially in response to trends here in the state and state regulation. So just to kind of go over what our new proposed goals are. For context, the previous goals, there was 11 in total, and they were all modal specific. So we had a goal for passenger rail, we had a goal for aviation, we had one for roads. Here, instead of that, we're kind of consolidating and looking at more broader themes. So improving mobility for all here kind of looks at what sort of mobility improvements, whether it be capacity increasing improvements or looking at, intelligent transportation systems, what sort of improvements do we need to improve mobility? Maintaining a safe and connected multimodal network, how do we maintain that network? How do we fix potholes and make sure that our network is, well kept up? Practice sustainable planning is kind of a revamped goal. This is where we inserted a lot of things about CAPTI and about electrification of the fleet. Fiscal responsibility, making sure we're always going after grants and seeking funding for our projects and our programs. And then a new goal for this time around is promoting social equity and community engagement. And again, this will be kind of looking at it through a Placer County lens, which will be kind of going through that process as we do our RTP update. I'm going to turn it over to Mike. He's going to kind of go into a little more detail on what specifically we changed and then get into what feedback we're requesting from the board.
Thank you, Corey, and good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. As Corey mentioned, we consolidated a lot of our existing goals into new goals, essentially, that were saying the same thing. And one thing that's very important to remember is that none of these goals supersede each other or are prioritized over one another. They are all equal. So we're considering all these goals in the framework and lens upon which we look at projects for investments in our transportation plan. As Corey mentioned, we did add some additional, I would say, themed language or themed goals, policies, and objectives that talked about enhancing or supporting zero-emission vehicles and infrastructure supporting that, as well as a brand new goal addressing equity and community engagement. So what we're looking for today from your feedback is really looking at kind of the new or enhanced language or goals that we incorporated into this new policy element. And in particular, this slide doesn't spell out those policies exactly. Those are actually in your packet. But for the sustainable planning goal, we are generally themed with our policies and objectives around supporting projects that help to address federal and state legislation that's requiring a lot of the conversion over to zero emission technology, as well as considering, as Corey mentioned, the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPTI, which is a new lens that the state is looking at in all of their state funding programs. So regardless of whether or not we agree with all of it, we have to compete with projects that address CAPTI. So that's important that we at least acknowledge that in some of our policies, that we're looking at CAPTI as one of many lenses to evaluate projects and programs. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we respect, and it is actually incorporated in the language in our sustainable planning element, that while we're looking at CAPTI, we are growing as a region. So we want to ensure that our transportation infrastructure is adequately designed with CAPTI in mind, but still adequately designed to address future growth. And that includes accommodations for capacity increasing projects. So that's the first feedback that we're looking at today. The second is, of course, on the new element for equity. So as many of you recall, equity is something that's being discussed all around the state. It's actually being discussed at the federal level as well. And what we want to do here in our region is define equity from the lens of PCTPA or Placer County. We know that SACOG has their own definitions for equity, which we most likely will complement to many extents, but we want to dive into it further for Placer County. And in the next several months, we're actually going to be engaging our on-call communications consultant to help us with developing and defining equity for Placer County and developing a plan for that, which we can then incorporate into our RTP as narrative that the state will then see that we're actually addressing equity on our local level. And then the second thing to keep in mind too that we're addressing with our policies, and again, this is the general theme on this slide that's presented, not actual policies, but we want to make sure that equity is scalable to our region and that it also is something that we can evaluate and refine as our region grows. Because as new people and new populations and new conditions come into Placer County, we want to be able to re-examine if equity changes or what changes we may need to make in the lens of our transportation investments to address equity as we define it in Placer County. So with that, of course, the board is welcome to provide input on those two items and elements that I just talked about. But once we get further feedback from the board, we will be engaging again on defining equity in the next couple of months and bringing that back to the board for discussion, hopefully either in late summer or early fall. And then we can incorporate that into our regional transportation plan moving forward, which will be one of many lenses that we look at when we're looking at projects and investments in the plan. With that, this concludes our presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Okay. Board members, questions? Mr. Howdeshow. That's okay, please.
So, Mr. Joyner and I sit on the SACOG board. You know, there's a lot of conversation. I'm sorry. Mayor Dowden Calveo, Mayor Joyner and I sit on the SACOG board. All right, thank you. I'm going to go out and come back in. I'm in a grumpy mood today, evidently, for no reason in particular.
Get him a donut, please.
I've already had one. Maybe I just need a second. But you know, last week, you know, there was at the board of directors meeting, there was some concern in the regional funding round about the lack of funding for state good repair and pavement and things like that. And, you know, I think of you know, young families, maybe single parents, driving on roads with potholes, and they hit a pothole, right? And then they're further behind because now they've got repairs to the automobile. And so I think that's an important equity lens, right? We often are aspirational and transformational in, you know, our transportation conversations, but it's not an either-or proposition. And, you know, in equity, we really certainly have to think about equity for all and make sure that, and I learned recently, and so you can fact check me on this, that a bus can only handle 3 bicycles by law. So, you know, it's an integrated system, but you can't get to the grocery store and pick up your kids and do everything on a bike. So, equity for all. Thanks.
Any other comments or questions?
I've got a quick comment, if I may. Objective 1.4, I'm really pleased to see that here. I know when I say things like this, it may be a little over the horizon, but we have a transportation system that is about to go vertical. There are multiple corporations that are currently working on what they're calling air taxis. If I understand correctly, Uber Air has already secured 2 landing spots at the Galleria. So this is going to go vertical and is going to happen more quickly than we believe.
Uber.
And so having the over the horizon foresight to fold this into our conversation about a multi-layered transportation system, I think is absolutely essential. This is going to be a challenge moving forward. Our airports give us a great advantage in that competition in that space. And so I'm really pleased to see this be here, and I think we're going to need to flesh that out quite a bit in the coming years. Thank you.
Any more comments?
I just wanted to say, I appreciate staff's consolidation of the policies and the goals and the objectives down so that it is a more, concise document. So thank you very much for that. And I also appreciate your take on ensuring that we are looking at sustainability. It is something that we're required to do, and I appreciate that we can do it through our lens. So thank you very much on that. And the same thing with regards to, inclusion and equity. I know that, the buzzwords are really diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so if we can sprinkle that throughout, the better for us as we're competing for grants and things of that nature. It's important that we acknowledge that that's there and that we take a look at it from our perspective. So thank you very much for recognizing that. It may be different, and it will be different for Placer County, but that doesn't mean we can't address it and incorporate it. So thank you very much for that.
Madam Chair, my fellow SACOG board member triggered a question. So will our equity and inclusion be inward facing or outward facing?
So I think it'll be a little bit of both. I think one of the things, and we're going to be looking at this, of course, over the next couple of months. We don't know exactly the answer of how we're going to apply it yet because we want to understand it better and focus on it. But I do think it'll be a little bit of both because I think from an inward perspective, it'll be something that will help guide staff in working with our jurisdictions to look at projects. It's not saying we're excluding projects, but to look at projects to see how they could be more competitive from that equity lens. For example, when we're looking at widening 65 and we're looking at now electrification projects associated with 65 to make that corridor more competitive, that's how we would apply an inward face of equity and sustainability. When we're looking at community engagement and when we're doing our outreach, that's when we're looking at outward focused equity and what populations are we not hitting or what populations are we not hearing from. So we're going to be looking at a little bit of both.
Do we need to add diversity in here anywhere? I mean, we have inclusion and equitable, but I'm wondering if that's another buzzword that's needed in here.
It is the board's call. We can.
That's something we can look at.
We can look at.
Okay. Hearing no more comments or discussion. Oh, you do? Okay. And then public.
Peter?
Yes, hi, thank you. I have a couple comments on the regional transportation plan. I appreciate the conciseness of some of the things, but what I do worry about, though, is that the policies for each mode be developed too. For example, the policies right now for transit in the RTP are extremely in need of review and changes. I pointed those out to Mike. And also, I think equity engagement has to go along with engagement. And engagement is particularly difficult for the board, partially because of the pandemic, but also because there aren't stakeholders for a lot of things that, for a lot of equity issues. And I would strongly suggest, okay, I looked at the equity statements for both the county and PCTPA. Interestingly enough, the county, one of the things that they had to discuss is the makeup of people who are on citizen advisory boards. And they say, well, that's not an issue because we don't have any citizen advisory boards. Precisely. PCTPA has no citizen advisory boards. And I think for the RTP, which is a three-year-long process, there has to be some continuity for citizen input. And I strongly suggest, and it would go a lot of ways towards meeting federal requirements, is you set up a citizens advisory committee. And that's where diversity can come in. Look at your equity elements and make sure your advisory board has not just people from stakeholder groups, but a diversity. You pick a minority of some sort, even though, or something just to include on the advisory board. I think this is so important. Just as a citizen, I find engagement particularly difficult. I'm limited to 3 minutes and you know, on topics, and it's very extremely difficult. So that is my strong recommendation as citizen advisory board, because stakeholder groups don't exist for minorities, for low-income people, for transit users, community organizations. They just don't exist. In large cities, they exist. And you have to come up with a process that can reach the general population, since you can't find adequate stakeholder groups. You can find Chamber of Commerce, you can find this and that, but it doesn't exist for the equity groups. So that's my strong recommendation. And I think that equity statement by the county is particularly of interest. We don't have an issue because we don't have any citizen advisory groups. Now, Mike, to his credit, and I, you know, I talk to Mike frequently, probably more than he wants me to, but he's agreed to do the, you know, set up a citizen advisory group for the short range transit plan. But that doesn't include any of the roads or anything else. And I, you know, I don't think you can have equity without citizen advisory boards on major projects. It's, your literature nationwide states that. You can't do that. Anyway, that's
Thank
those
you
are
for
my
your
comments.
comments, Mr. Eklund. Any other? I do have another public comment. Mr. Garabedian?
Well, it looks like the same old for basically the PCCP, Placer County Conservation Plan area, whether it's the windy little roads in the Hidden Falls area, filling up with traffic for expanding that park and trails, or the good old valley itself. I don't see anything here addressing, saying, okay, we're going to take an overall look and figure out how to get where we're going without so many cars. I mean, even the EV thing is all about more cars, of course, more stations. And that's a very questionable thing. Whether that's going to turn out to be a wonderful thing in the very short future, we'll see all the problems with that. But even so, I just, even, you know, giving lip service to CAPTI and so forth, we have to go back to scratch before the whole effort for 20 years ago started in the Placer County Conservation Plan. The number one thing is development. Everything, the first part, like the objectives are to provide for the land use planning. And there's too much already approved now. And the headaches that are going to be up there on Bickford Ranch, the $500 million from the Municipal Finance Authority just for part of that thing to make roads up there and stuff. The county's really just heading for gridlock, and flying vertically isn't going to help most people, and we're going to see it coming before in the next couple of years. So I don't see this looking forward the way that it needs to be done to get out of the headache that's already been approved. And I don't know what public input is after this point, too. It's not clear. The gentleman talking about equity issues, I don't know what any public input is on this now before you come out with your recommendations. That'd be good to know.
Thank you, Mr. Gibby. Okay, no more discussion on this item? Okay, well, we're going to move on. That was informational. So we're going to move on to item O, Nevada Station Building. Matt?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. When, I interviewed for this position, one of the things we talked about is sort of a 90-day plan and what we do over 6 months. And so in many facets of the agency and its staffing and its organization, as the lead fiduciary, for the agency, we've done a deep dive into a lot of different things. And one of them it's coming before you today is with regards to our building, which we own, and that we want to talk about. And so really the objective of the conversation today, and I might have these slides a little bit out of order, so I'll just go off slide here for a little bit. Really, I'm of the opinion that PCTPA should stay rock solidly focused on what its core mission is. And in my mind, that is to plan, fund, and help deliver mobility solutions for Placer County and all of our jurisdictions. And so I think the ownership of real property isn't akin to that central mission. And we currently are the owners of 299 Nevada Station, and Jody will help me talk you through some of the details of the financials and what that means for us from a fiscal perspective and also a staffing perspective, a labor market perspective, and things like that. So what we're coming before you today is to ask the authority to enter into a contract with CBRE to list 299 Nevada Station for sale. We're not asking for you today to approve a sale. What we're simply asking is to allow me to enter into a contract with them so we can explore the commercial market and the potential value of that building, so we then can put forward a full package to you to take action on if we were to dispose of 299 Nevada Street. And then what we would look to do is take those proceeds and invest them in funds, which would essentially have the same investment function that I think the original intent of the building, was meant for when it was originally purchased. But that's sort of what we want to have a conversation with you today about. Jody, why don't you go ahead and talk about the financial history, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Sure. Just to briefly go over the history, the financial side of the building. It was purchased in December of 2003, actually by Sparta, with an agreement that PCTPA would manage and pay the bond lease payments. The bond is currently at $876,000 remaining, and the final payment on the bond is in 2028-29. And if you want to go to the next slide. And to look at the lease income that we receive, we currently have 6 tenants, including PCTPA, that generate just shy of $27,000 monthly. We do have 1 vacant suite that has been vacant since March, and we are actively looking to fill. And it has only been, in the last 3 years, it's only been fully occupied for 1 month. And then the table there is just a look at the future of PCTPA's rent. It has historically gone up 3% annually, and it is actually now beyond the actual market rate of other leases out there. And then this is just a quick look at the profit loss history. There have been some years that we have deficit spent. There have been unforeseen building repairs and maintenance, and we have established a routine maintenance and tenant improvement accounts to help offset that.
Welcome to the landlord business.
Correct. Mm-hmm. And then this is just a look at some of the upcoming projects that we are aware of. Well, window washing just finished yesterday, so we could check that one off. And that's all I have.
So, and just I know we've been going long, and we've had a good meeting this morning. I mean, this is, I probably should have put this slide up front. This is what I had lived on the front end of this. I don't think ownership of real property is core to our mission. I come to you from working for a $2.2 billion private sector company with 5,000 employees. We had 64 offices, including 4 floors of the Empire State Building, and we didn't own one of them. We leased, and we leased because we wanted to control our cash flow, and we wanted to focus on what our mission is. And while I can respect the history of it, I just don't think it's core for us to be in the landlord business. As Jody pointed out, as this building ages, there's going to be milestone repairs that are needed. You've seen our OWP, you've seen how lean of an agency we run. Our ability to absorb large capital sort of needs or operation maintenance needs isn't really there. And so what we'd really like is fiscal certainty. And as Jody pointed out, we pay more per square foot than we should if we went to the market by a healthy margin. We also have more space than we need by a healthy margin. So it's time to, in my opinion, look at sort of right sizing in what we do. And so we're looking for fiscal certainty, and we think this is the prudent course. So the action that I'm asking for today is to authorize me to enter into a contract to list the real property. That's all.
Madam Chair, I have several questions, if I may. We're talking about, I appreciate what you're saying, not wanting to be in the landlord business and so forth. I 100% understand that. The rent, the increases to rent, I mean, Sparta is setting that, right? Or why are we increasing? What's driving that? Is it the cost to maintain the building, or what's driving the cost for?
It helps backfill
the space we're not able to rent out.
Correct.
Okay. The second thing I wanted to know about, for cities and counties, when we own buildings or property that we wish to sell, we have to declare them surplus, and there's a whole process involved. Is PCTPA exempt from those? I don't know.
I did not think we had to, as a special taxing district,
and you might
put
be,
it in
I don't
surplus.
know. I just know that we've been talking about, we have a building that we own, our former city hall, and there was some discussion of selling it, and you don't just list it for sale. You have to declare it surplus. You have to provide opportunity for housing groups under HCD to take a look. There's a whole drawn-out process. So in your investigation, I just would like confirmation that you're not subject to any of those laws. You may not be. I don't know, but that's just a question that I had. And then the third question really was, if you were to sell a building, again, I know you're just asking us for the permission to list it. What would your thoughts be for relocation? Would you be looking to rent space?
Potentially. Let me, did you want to answer the second question about surplus property, or?
I don't have the answer to that at this time.
Yeah, is Deanne still on? Go ahead, Deanne. Let's take one at a time, and then I will answer the last question.
Yeah, the Sparta is the owner of the building, and Sparta, by its Joint Powers Authority agreement, follows the rules that are applicable to the city of Rockland. So Sparta would need to follow rules that apply to general law cities. So I think a very good question. I think the purpose of today's discussion was to bring this issue to the board, to get the board's policy input for staff to move forward. And if that is the direction that the board supports investigating this, we will evaluate the surplus property rules as it would apply to a general law city and Sparta, and include that in the analysis and the approach for moving this forward.
Good. Again, it was just something that came up to me, and so that will obviously play a part in an ultimate decision. So I appreciate that you would be doing some additional research and bring that to us. So
thank you for raising the issue, because very good issue for staff to be mindful of.
Yes, because it is.
It's a process, and the law has changed. Yeah, right. Thank you.
And so to the last question you asked about relocation, it would depend on what was in the financial best interest of the agency. We may find that when we list the property that we get someone who's interested that is an owner-investor, and they simply want to purchase the property as an investment and might look to PCTPA to lease back that space for a certain defined period of time. And in doing so, we would get the best terms for the agency and the taxpayer. If that is the case, then we would probably look to negotiate with that new owner about some term of lease and some market rate and even potentially subdivide the space we have, so it better fits the 7 FTEs, but that would all be subject to negotiation. We may find ourselves in a situation where the person or entity that wants to purchase the building is an owner occupier, and they want to occupy the space, and they want to say, hey, thanks, but you got to go. And in that instance, we would look to relocation, and we would look to relocate to a space that better fits, the size of the staff and is market priced. Yeah.
Selfishly, I would like it to remain in Auburn.
Yeah, me too. It's just what
The jobs.
Yeah.
Selfishly, I would say that I've got the entire second floor of my old city hall that is available, and we can make it right.
Hey!
We're gonna have an old school Dutch auction here, but no, it's a good, and it's a very good question.
There you go.
Oh,
We do too,
We're currently
though.
in a train station. We're used to a train station. Okay, yeah.
We got. We have a train station and an airport, okay?
So that is the action we're asking for today, subject to ensuring, based on what General Counsel said, that we can do that, to enter into agreement to list, and then come back to you and let you know if it would indeed make sense to dispose of the real property.
I think it's a fiscally prudent approach, given the economy and the impacts of this upon the agency, and so I'll go ahead and make the motion.
Well, we need to open up for public comment.
Yeah, and I have a
Yeah, you
question
have- okay,
before
okay,
you
go
go running off and making.
Well, the motion's been made.
I'll
It
second
hasn't been
for
seconded.
purposes
There you
of
go. Now you can
discussion.
discuss it.
We still need to let the public.
will.
speak. They may change your mind then. They might. So, Matt and Jody, from the expense standpoint, does that include staff time that is involved in the management of the facility?
It sure does.
Okay, perfect. And can you give us a sense of how much time that is?
I want to say it's like 200 hours, I want to say.
A year?
annually.
A year?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is not being focused on
Transportation?
our core, it's being focused elsewhere.
Yeah, and honestly, that is what is accounted for, and then there are a lot of after-hour and weekend calls from the Auburn Police that come to me, that come to Jody, to deal with camping, to deal with folks in the stairwell. We've installed. We both have an app on our phone. We get notified when someone's in the stairway, or a random raccoon. So there is a lot of attention that needs to be paid to the building. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. That's all I had.
Okay, let's open it up for public comment. Anybody in the public like to comment on this? Mr. Garabedian? Okay, good. All right, hearing none, we have a motion by Councilman Joyner, and a second
Bruce?
by Bruce. Okay.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris, oh, I'm sorry, Burris has stepped out, Cortez,
She left.
She stepped out.
Oh, Cortez has stepped away. She's, had to leave.
okay. Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Combs.
Aye.
Howdeschelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, so, Executive Director's Report.
Well, thank you very much. I'll keep this short. First of all, I want to thank those who accompanied me to Washington, D.C. for our cap-to-cap meeting. I thought we had a very successful and productive meeting. We were able to meet with our new federal lobbyist, talk about sort of our federal advocacy plan over the next 3 to 5 years. So I thought that was very helpful, and for him to hear your input directly. We also had the opportunity to meet with U.S. Senator Padilla's staff. We met with 4 congresspeople, Kylie, LaMalfa, Matsui, and Garamundi, which was great, and had a really good conversations with both the House T&I, Transportation Infrastructure, minority and majority staffers, and those were smaller in nature, and I think pretty productive around future federal policy and what PCTPA needs and is looking for. And then, of course, we met with the DOT, Federal Highway, and FTA. I do want to also let you know, as far as some of our funding measure activities that have been going on, the education campaign is in full swing. We will be out in the community over the summer. We've already had a couple of hosted events, including yours, Chair Jones. But we'll be out in the summer at a lot of community and hosted events throughout the district. And our digital campaign ads are now running via social media and streaming TV. And I think, what we need to do is for June, come back and show you those. I think it would be good, and I apologize for not thinking about that ahead of time and showing them to you today. But we're gonna bring those back to you for the June meeting. Just a couple of things. One, highly likely, we're not gonna have a July board meeting. Looking at the look ahead that Solvay provides, there wouldn't be a very robust agenda, so it's highly likely we will go dark in July. Lastly, I just want to point out and put a plug up for SACOG's Blueprint Workshop. That's going to be on the 16th of June at the Folsom Community Center from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. Corey will send you all an email to that effect, so you don't have to take a note on it. But we'd really encourage you to attend and also let your councils and associated boards know and attend as well. This is the process by which we participate with SACOG to help sort of set the path of the future scenario plannings for their 6-county region. So would strongly encourage you to attend that on the 16th of June if you can.
Can I tack on to that
please.
a little bit? Absent us being there and being very vocal about our needs, the focus is going to shift over to the, what are they calling the?
Mega region?
No, the corridor.
Oh,
The east side. Southeast corridor.
Oh, the south, yes.
Connector,
Yeah,
whatever
the connector.
they're calling it. That's where the focus will be for the entire region if we don't give voice to our needs as well.
I'll be there.
Yeah, I will be as well.
That ends my executive director's report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Then is there any other thing to come before this board? Seeing or hearing none, we adjourn. Our next meeting is June 28th.